When times are tough, which they are right now, when you just escalate problems and you complain and you point fingers and blame, you are only making the situation worse. The situation is the situation. And how you decide to show up in it is going to be your experience of that situation. Hi, welcome back to Reflect Forward. I'm your host, Kerry Siggins, and I'm so glad you are here today. So, a few weeks ago, I was meeting with a group of professionals, of CEOs, of leaders of their companies, of which I am on a board of. And we were talking about some of the struggles that we are having in these crazy days of running and growing businesses. We were talking about people's contribution levels, what our roles are as leaders, and what our employees' roles are, and the contribution each of us make. And I had just come off of dealing with a particularly dramatic situation. And I said, sometimes I just want people to do their fucking jobs. And they all looked at me and said, oh my God, I want to say that out loud too. Sometimes it's just like there's so much that's going on. There's so many moving pieces and parts. And many times people just don't see that bigger picture and they get caught up in workplace drama, in gossip, in wanting to know everything when sometimes there's not a need to know, or sometimes we can't share all of the information with them because it's confidential and it creates this drama. And I'm so glad that you said that out loud. And this conversation really hit me because, as you know, I am a huge believer in creating culture. I am a huge believer in supporting people and in soliciting feedback and understanding what's going on in an organization. And if an outsider was listening, they might think that there was contempt in this conversation. But as I stepped back and I really looked at it, I realized that it's not contempt at all. It is fatigue. We leaders are leading through volatility, strategic pressure, economic whiplash, constant decision load. And this is a shared reality. We leaders feel it. And guess what? So do our employees. Fear is ambient right now, which is really unfortunate because when we live our lives based on fear, we stay stuck. But that's a whole nother podcast episode. So I want to acknowledge this shared reality that we have. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that I think that so many people are feeling it. There are many leaders who are like, I just need people to do their jobs. And there are many employees who are like, I'm scared. There's so much uncertainty, or working for my leader sucks, or I don't understand where we're going as a company. I don't understand what's expected of me. And both of those things are real. And this is not about dismissing the emotion, it's about recentering what contribution really means. So, I'd like to talk about this cultural swing that we have taken in the last half a decade. It was a swing that needed to happen. I think many leaders, many companies, and many still are, were in command and control. And we absolutely needed to make work more human. We are all humans. We are all trying to figure out how to be happy, to take care of our families, to grow, to learn, to get ahead in life. And when we feel like we are just a number in a cog working for a company and for a leader who does not care about us, it is dehumanizing. And we absolutely needed to change that. We needed more mental health awareness. We needed to create more psychological safety and understanding how trauma informed leadership is impacting people's lives. These have been important correctives. And in case you need a definition of what trauma informed leadership is, it is recognizing that people bring lived experiences to the workplace, and these lived experiences shape how they respond to stress, authority, and feedback. And when we understand trauma informed leadership, it encourages leaders to avoid shaming, which is very important. Shame is a horrible, horrible feeling, and we should never try to shame people, and to create more predictable, respectable environments. And that's what trauma informed leadership is all about. I think all of this is incredibly important. And so many cultures have been reformed because there was this need to shift to a more humane workplace. But here's what I think the issue is: the overcorrection happens when discomfort is treated as harm and accountability is softened to avoid tension. We cannot avoid discomfort as human beings. In fact, we are not supposed to avoid discomfort. We grow through discomfort. We learn through discomfort. Life is not meant to just be this easy breezy, everything is certain, feels so good. It would be so incredibly boring if that were the case. We are meant to solve problems. So when we overcorrect by saying any kind of discomfort in the workplace is harmful, and we can't hold people accountability because it creates disharmony or too much tension, then we are not doing our job as leaders. Discomfort is part of life. It is part of leadership and it is part of working in a workplace. We're never going to avoid it. And this really becomes apparent when we are working with people, when we are thinking about our leadership through the lens of other people's traumas and our own traumas. But here's the thing, awareness of someone's history does not eliminate their responsibility in the present. That means they have to take responsibility of their life. And what this looks like is compassion and empathy. I have a great podcast guest. I think she's coming on next week. We talk about this very topic where you can be empathetic and say, I am really sorry that this is going on in your life. I feel for you. And I need you to do your job. Compassion and standards can and must coexist. And each of us plays a role in how it feels when compassion and standards coexist. It takes leaders within the company and employees in the company, each understanding their contribution. So let's talk about contribution because this is the real contract between employees and employers. When you are hired, you are essentially signing a contract. Maybe you didn't sign an actual employment contract, but you're basically saying, I am going to work for you for money and you are going to hire me and I am going to create value. It is mutual value creation. And in great workplaces and healthy workplaces, compassion, growth, and opportunity is an exchange for meaningful contribution along with a salary. But when uncertainty rises, which let's face it, nothing is ever certain, but things feel more uncertain than they ever have, at least in my lifetime, the need for clarity and reliability rises. And so this is the crux of what I'm getting at here. When we look through the lens of contribution, whether we are leaders of a team, what is our contribution to creating a psychologically safe place where there's clarity? And through the lens of an employee, where I need to do my job to create the value so that I can grow and learn and move the company forward, contribution creates agency. Complaint amplifies helplessness. And that's what we find ourselves in when we gossip, when we complain, when we vent, when we bitch, quite frankly, about what leadership isn't doing or what our employees aren't doing. So here's the hard question. In difficult seasons like we are in right now, do we default to narrative or do we default to ownership? And that's why I liked this conversation so much with this group of leaders, because that's what we were talking about. When people fall into a narrative, into a story that they're telling themselves, and it creates drama in the workplace, or it creates instability, or they aren't as effective in their job because they're worried about this story that they've told, this narrative that they've told, or do they take ownership? And do we take ownership as leaders when times are tough? And our responsibility to creating that clarity, to being transparent, to creating psychological safety, and employees' responsibility to, yes, do their jobs. So now let's talk about where this breakdown actually happens, and we'll start with leaders. The first question you need to ask yourself, are expectations explicit and measurable? I did a podcast on unspoken expectations and how completely unfair they are when you have expectations, but people don't understand them. Like, you're just hoping that they're reading your mind. We as leaders must create clarity. So, have you clearly stated your expectations? Are they measurable? And did the person agree? That is incredibly important. The agreement. Yes, I understand what your expectations are, and I'm good with this. The second question you need to ask yourself is, have you tolerated misalignment too long because you did not want to create friction? We all avoid hard conversations and hard decisions because we don't want to make people feel bad. We don't want to disrupt the organization. We want to manage the narrative. There are things that every single one of us are avoiding. Whether you are a decisive leader or whether you are a clear communicator, whether you are incredibly direct and blunt, there are things that you are avoiding because you know that it's going to create friction. So ask yourself that question. Where have I tolerated misalignment? Where you have tolerated misalignment means that there is probably going to be dissatisfaction with your employees. The third question you need to ask yourself is, have you mistaken being liked for being effective? This was a big one for me, especially early on in my leadership, because I have a likability thing. I am a 3 in the Enneagram, an achiever. My personality type, which I have come to love about myself, even though I hated it for a long time and it caused me a lot of like, "Ugh, I don't want to be a person who wants to manage image and manage the narrative." But that's my personality. That's what I came onto this planet with. So understanding that about myself has been incredibly powerful. You need to look at that for yourself too. Have you mistaken being liked for being effective? Because when we do things to be liked, we tend to not create clarity. We tend to not say what needs to be said. And we tend to not make decisions or do things that we think will be disruptive. But that really just causes a toxic workplace. It doesn't create psychological safety when we're trying to manage our likability complex. This is incredibly important. If you want to meaningfully contribute as a leader, you must be effective. And to be effective, you don't necessarily have to be liked. And then finally, ask yourself, are you clear about what doing your job actually means in your organization? In my case, doing your job meant not getting sucked into the drama, the gossip, the complaining that is keeping you from being exceptional at your job. When you are complaining about things, when you're stuck in that negativity, it does pull your energy away from mastering your role. And that is what I meant when I was like, I just wish people would do their job instead of just swirling in this gossip and this like toxic energy that just drains everybody. Focus on being great at what you're doing. Focus on coming up with solutions and suggestions on how to make things better. And you will be a better employee and you will actually like yourself better because a lot of people think that venting and complaining makes them feel better, but it doesn't. It keeps them stuck into this negativity spiral. So, when you are saying what doing your job actually means in your organization, be really clear about that. Yes, it does mean being exceptional at the tasks on your job description, but it also has a component of how you are showing up and how you are making other people feel, how people are experiencing you while you're doing your job. Once you have that kind of clarity, expectations are explicit and measurable. You're not tolerating misalignment because you're not afraid of discomfort. When you understand that you're being effective instead of focusing on being liked, and when you're clear about what doing your job actually means in the organization, you are fulfilling your contribution as a leader. Now, from the employee side of things, here is what this looks like for you. And this is where the breakdown happens. You can ask yourself, am I clear on what success looks like in my role? If you're not, ask. This is part of the ownership mindset, a responsibility to understand. You can throw your hands up and say, "Oh, my boss didn't tell me." But the reality is that you're then giving your power away. So, are you clear about what success looks like in your role? If not, ask. You can ask, when stress rises, do I escalate problems or do I bring solutions? This is how you know if you are a toxic employee or one who is going to help resolve issues and build the culture. Because when times are tough, which they are right now, when you just escalate problems and you complain and you point fingers and blame, you are only making the situation worse. The situation is the situation. And how you decide to show up in it is going to be your experience of that situation. And when you are going like, you know what, this really sucks. And I have some ideas on how to make it better. And I'm going to pitch it in a way that shows that I want to be part of the solution instead of just contributing to the problem. That is really powerful. That is contribution. The third thing you can ask yourself is, am I confusing discomfort with unfairness? A lot of times when we find ourselves engaged in workplace drama, it has this feeling of like, this isn't fair. This isn't being done right. This is being done to me and it's not fair. But the reality is, sometimes things happen that just create discomfort and there is growth in that discomfort. So rather than saying this isn't fair, you can say, what can I learn from this situation? Why am I feeling uncomfortable? What is this brushing up against? Because the goal is not to avoid discomfort. We humans are meant to be uncomfortable. That is how we grow. And we are here on this planet to grow, to expand consciousness, to experience life. And life is not all rainbows and unicorns. We grow through discomfort, just like a diamond grows through pressure and force and heat. So do we. So, am I confusing discomfort with unfairness? And how do I sit in the discomfort and come up with solutions? And then finally ask myself, am I asking what I think I'm owed before I'm asking how I can contribute? This is such a powerful situation. I have had so many conversations with my 13-year-old son, and I am having him listen to the Diary of a CEO episode where Stephen interviews Tony Robbins. And I absolutely love what Tony Robbins has to say about this. He said that the place where most people get it wrong when they go into the workplace and they want to get ahead is they think that they are owed something. And when you switch the mindset to how do I contribute? How do I add value? Those are the people who grow faster because they're not in this victim mindset of like, oh, I'm owed something. My employer owes me something. My boss owes me something. And yes, your leaders, they do have a contribution to make. But flipping that mindset of how can I contribute? How can I add value? It empowers you. We're looking at what you are owed disempowers you. And that's where breakdowns happen. When you feel like you are owed something, rather than flipping the switch to how can I contribute? When ownership erodes on either end, whether you are a leader or an employee, and we start looking at through the lens of this is what I am owed, this is what I deserve, we stop thinking about contribution, and then resentment replaces trust. And that's how things start to unwind. So now I want to reframe why doing your job is a form of leadership. Doing your job is not small, it is stabilizing. Being great at your job makes you feel good. It stabilizes your nervous system. And for everybody, doing a good job means that you're meeting a standard you agreed to. It means regulating yourself before projecting your frustration outward. It means raising issues early, not after performance slips. And it means recognizing your output, whether you're a leader or an individual contributor, affects the entire system. So, for leaders, as you think about doing your job as a form of leadership, it looks like setting clear expectations. It looks like defining what great looks like. It means you address issues early and directly. It means you hold space for emotion and then return to standards. And it means that you do not outsource or avoid accountability. You use it as a way to lift people up to help people grow. For employees, doing your job as a form of self leadership means that you own your role fully. It means that you separate circumstance, what's happening in this situation, from contribution. That's so powerful. It means bringing solutions when you're raising problems. And it means that you understand that growth often feels uncomfortable. And the goal is not to avoid discomfort, it's to learn from it. So, as I reflect back onto this conversation, and the reason why I said sometimes I just need people to do their fucking jobs, it was me openly admitting my fatigue, my frustration. I had to take a deep look at where did I allow standards to drift, or did I not address issues in a timely manner? What created this situation? Because here's the thing, I cannot demand ownership without modeling it. So, even though, yes, it is really important for our employees to do their jobs and to not engage in the drama or the negativity or all of those things that honestly make a workplace not so great to work at, we leaders set the tone. We set the stage for how people show up. And that was my ownership moment. And I debated on whether or not to record this podcast because it can feel uncomfortable. But the reality is that we leaders have a responsibility to create a great workplace, and our employees have a responsibility to show up and contribute and to commit to adding to the culture instead of taking away from it. To have a great workplace, it requires that partnership. It requires everybody working together, and it requires everybody to understand that nothing's going to be perfect because no company is, that there is discomfort in growth, especially in volatile times like this. And how do we work together so that we all feel like we are sharing in our contribution in creating a great culture? So, to wrap up this episode, I'd like to go through the key takeaways. First, empathy and standards must rise together. Removing standards in the name of care creates confusion. Holding standards without care creates fear. Mature leadership requires both. You can be empathetic and you can still hold your high standards. Number two, contribution creates agency in chaos. In volatile times, focusing on what you can control restores stability. Doing your job well is a grounding act, whether you are a leader or an individual contributor. Contribution creates agency. Number 3, discomfort is not the same as harm. Hard conversations, feedback, and high expectations are not inherently unsafe. They are a path to growth. Do not be afraid of discomfort. That is why we are here. It is how we grow, it is how we learn, and it is how we evolve. Number 4, avoidance erodes culture faster than conflict. When leaders delay accountability, resentment builds quietly and standards weaken. It is not okay to delay accountability. It absolutely is required. And then number 5, ownership is mutual. Leaders must lead clearly and employees must perform responsibility. When either side abdicates, trust declines. So, in closing, I invite you to do a self audit. If you're a leader, ask where you're tolerating what you should address. If you are an employee, ask where are you narrating, telling yourself that story instead of contributing. And if you are both, which many of us are, ask yourself where you can raise your standard today. In uncertain times, like we are in today, the most stabilizing thing you can do is simple: do your job and do it well, whether you are a leader or an employee or both. All right, that is my podcast for today. Hopefully, it sparked something in you. Maybe it made you a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe you were like, heck yeah, I really resonate with that. I would love to hear from you. Either way, let me know what you think about this. And if you think someone could benefit from this podcast episode, please feel free to share it with them and then head over to YouTube or your favorite podcast platform and subscribe. Please write a review and send me those direct messages. I love hearing from you. All right, we'll see you next week.